Thank you so much for coming this evening. My name is Matthew Sackle, and I am the Associate Manager of Education at the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. On behalf of our CEO, Susan Abrams, Board of Directors, staff, and volunteers, I wish to welcome you to this evening's program, the virtual book and author program, The Unstoppable Siggy B. Wilzig's Astonishing Journey from Auschwitz Survivor and Penniless Immigrant to Wall Street Legend by Joshua M. Greene. Joshua M. Greene is a popular lecturer on Holocaust history and an author whose biographies have sold more than a 500,000 copies worldwide. A former instructor at Hofstra and Fordham Universities, Greene is the recipient of numerous awards for his books and films. Greene's books include Justice at Dachau, The Trials of an American Prosecutor, called Riveting, Historical Writing at its Best by Douglas Brinkley, a presidential historian for CNN. Greene has been a featured speaker at the Pentagon and by the Judge Advocate General's College. He was honored by the New York Public Library Distinguished Author Series and frequently lectures at the State Bar Associations on issues of war, crimes, law. He has spoken on issues of Holocaust memory for such outlets as NPR and Fox News, and his editorials have appeared in print in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and of course, the Chicago Tribune. Greene sits on the board of the Yale University Video Archive for Holocaust Testimonies. While Senior Vice President for Global Affairs at Reuter Finn Communications in the early 2000s, he served as a Director of Strategic Planning for the United Nations Summit of Religious and Spiritual Leaders. Among his documentary films are Hitler's Courts, Betrayal of the Rule of Law in Nazi Germany, which aired on PBS, and Memory After Belsen, The Future of Holocaust Remembrance for Discovery. He is a recipient of 5 Best Program of the Year awards from TV Guide and Emmy nomination for People, a celebration of diversity, which debuted at the United Nations. Currently, he teaches mindfulness in the workplace for the Zarb School of Business at Hofstra University. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Joshua Greene.
Thank you, Matthew. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. Welcome, everybody. I'm very glad to be meeting you virtually. And I think we can start by allowing Siggy to speak to you in his own words. What you're about to see is a 15-minute film that was created based on Siggy Wilzig's testimony for the Steven Spielberg Shoah Foundation. He was recorded just a few weeks before he passed away in January of 2003. But you will get a sense of him from what you're about to see, which opens with a bit of a montage showing that for survivors of the Holocaust, the memory never fades. And after we come back from the film, I'll be happy to engage with Matthew in some Q&A, and then we'll open this up for your questions afterwards. So if that works for you, let's get started.
The longer I live, the more I remember. I'm trying to get away from the past, but it isn't possible. I am not liberated yet. I live in Auschwitz every day.
I was born in 26 in Koyanke, It was West Prussia, about 155 miles northeast of Berlin. 4,500 people, and I would think there were about 1,500 Jews. My mother's name was Sophie, and my father's name was Isidore. My mother was an Orthodox woman. My father made a little living. He bought hides with 2 horses and a wagon. In 1935, we left everything, and the next morning we were in Berlin. There was an immediate change when Hitler came to power. You had already the sons joining the Nazi party. Well, I was beaten up regularly. Kristallnacht, I was 12 years old. As a child, and you see synagogues burn, Jewish homes go up in flames, and the police not doing anything. It was like the end of the world. It was forced labor run by the army. It used to make lamps before the war, and I worked on a lathe. I was 14 and a half years old, and I worked 72 hours. How much more can you do? They called it evacuation. That was the word. For instance, I was picked up in the middle of the night, 2:30, 3 o'clock, from this Lampenweber, from this forced labor that I did. When the trains pulled up, I looked out of the window. I know we were going east. But going east didn't mean Auschwitz. We didn't know there was an Auschwitz. So we arrived the night of March 3rd, bitter cold. I saw flames coming out only about 150 feet away from the train. So I thought it was a brick factory. I didn't know that people would be burned and gassed. To have been born as a Jew in Germany, to get beaten, to get hard labor, all of that. But the gas chambers, no, that you didn't expect. Where 10,000 people could be gassed in one night. The smell that is a little bit hard to describe because there is no other smell like this. Have you ever seen people being burned? Have you ever smelled them? Neither did I. You see in my arm what the Nazis did. 104, 732. The little triangle, only for Jews. The selection was really a dastardly, terrible situation. My mother was immediately murdered in the gas chamber. My father was badly beaten, and my father died in front of me. The Auschwitz one was the main camp. The main camp are brick buildings, block by block. And 10 was the experimental, where the woman went in, and the women didn't come out. Please do not ask me what kind of experiment. I think the Germans had a word, unmenschlich, unhuman. How did I find a way to live? If you didn't find out what I found out, you would be dead. There was no other way. I looked for every opening that they could possibly use someone like me, and I overheard something about bricklayers. I became an instant bricklayer. I did it for about 6 months. They needed someone in the laundry. I never worked in the laundry in my life, but I got away with 3-4 months. How do you survive 2 years of Auschwitz? It was not my education, which I didn't have any. It was my brain, which I didn't have much. It was the hand of God. The death march began on the 17th of January. We left Auschwitz and we started to march 150, 160 miles. It was a combination of open cattle cars and walking. It was winter time. We huddled together. The first stop was Auschwitz, a major center for coal and for metal. When the doors opened, a sight that I will never forget. We were sent to Vienna, to Milk and to Steyr. Our marching ended in Mauthausen. And when we were taken into the small shower room, we actually felt you would be gassed when you hear the clicking of the metal. That's something that stays with you forever. Somebody pointed on top of a hill a uniform I'd never seen, the American khaki uniform. They broke down the gates. That's where I was liberated. I had fever and sickness and everything else. I weighed 82 pounds. I left Europe November 29th, 47, and arrived in America December 12th, 47. What kind of work did I do first when I came to this country? Next, I was the original glue sniffer, putting glue on the back of leather bags for $28 a week. Oh, next I became an experienced leather goods salesman. My mind was made up that I can sell better than anybody else. Naomi Sisselman. We got married March 1454 in the Little Hungary on Houston Street. The whole dinner was $12.95, including the plaster flower. In 6 or 7 weeks, I went from salesman to general manager. I ran the business and doubled it. What did I do next? I acquired control of Wilshire Oil Company of Texas, a little oil company. I bought it piece by piece by piece by piece. The Rothschild and me went to the bank, the Trust Company of New Jersey, a 100-year-old institution. I was only the second Jew to become a president of a bank. The Jews were not bankers. Maybe there were a couple of savings and loans, but not of major size. Commercial banking particularly was a fiercely anti-Semitic business. They think because I'm a refugee and because I never went to school, I didn't even graduate public school, that how the hell do I become a president of a bank? I did it anyhow. I'm the president of a $4 billion bank. I was born to be president. If there's an organization that has anything to do with the Holocaust, I address the organizations, I give money, and I insist that my children go. see, the people that speak about it, and we're not there, they have to take the best from books, from studying, from movies, from theater. But when you were there at a young age, then it stays with you.
When I see what I went through and hundreds of thousands of others that are not here to tell you, so I speak for them. I have that right. I have that obligation to speak for them because we're a dying breed. And too many people are telling you there was no Holocaust. Never can anyone describe the scene. If you hear it 1,000 times, the chances are you are not capable of believing it.
What kinds of nightmares do you have?
Very bad. Can't even talk about. It's something that is there. You are in Auschwitz every day. I'm going to tell you something that I don't think I ever said. As terrible as it sounds, I don't think I could live without the nightmares. It gives me the very ultra realistic difference between life and death. It shows me what life is now, particularly as a Jew, and that I didn't give it up, what I am. I wouldn't want to be anything else. If I would have to go through, God forbid, the same thing, I would go through the same thing as a Jew.
Thank you so much. That was a fascinating and sobering look into a obviously charismatic and passionate man. Now that we've heard about Siggy in his words, I'm wondering if we could hear a little bit about him in your words.
Oh, you bet. It's my favorite topic for discussion. I never tire about talking about Siggy Wilson. First of all, it bears mentioning this project took about 7 years to create from start to finish as a book. And it's doing quite well. I'm very pleased to say. People are responding very strongly and positively to Siggy's story. I think in large measure because he is such a unique personality and embodies in so many ways what we humans are capable of doing, having gone through the hardest, darkest of times. By the way, I must apologize if people were disturbed by some of the more graphic scenes in that short documentary. My partner and I had to come to some tough decisions about what to show and what not to show. And the fact of the matter is, I can tell you from teaching Holocaust at the undergraduate and graduate levels, the ignorance of the Holocaust is absolutely stunning, particularly among young people. So we could not assume that the audience would actually know anything about the extent or the depth of the horror that we mean when we say the word Holocaust. So some of that stark imagery was necessary in order to just to convey to younger viewers in particular what it is we're dealing with. And of course, that became a critical theme in Siggy's life after coming to America and building a platform of wealth and influence, that he could finally speak about the Holocaust, promote Holocaust awareness in a way that people would listen, because this was a man of accomplishment, a real David and Goliath epic saga, if you will.
And now with all of the biographies that you've written, and with there's no dearth of subjects to write on in regard to the Holocaust, what drew your attention to Siggy? How did you come across this story? What drew you to this?
Right. Well, first of all, there's nothing like personal narrative to bring people into a topic they may not know much about. There's a saying in Holocaust studies that statistics don't bleed. There's a critical balance created by video testimony, memoirs, biographies, just such as the story of Siggy in Unstoppable. A critical balance that's created to the paper documentation, which is important, but my own involvement with Holocaust studies was an initial gravitation toward testimony, because I didn't think that historians would actually be able to convey the dramatic depth of what had occurred. And having done about a dozen such biographies prior to this one, I thought I was finished. I really didn't think I would do anymore. It's a grim, depressing subject for research and writing.
Emotional, yes.
Very emotional. And yet one day, about 8 years ago now, the phone rings and it's Siggy's eldest child. He had 3 children. His son, Ivan, who had read some of my books and said, I'd like you to consider writing my father's story. So at first I said, thanks, but no thanks. I'm kind of done with that. I want to go now toward the light. I've had enough darkness. And Ivan was insistent. He said, my father was the light. He was a torch of hope for every immigrant who ever came to America. And you really must learn more about him. So I did. I did some research and found that Ivan had not been exaggerating. His father was an extraordinary human being who accomplished so much for preserving and perpetuating Holocaust memory.
And that just convinced you, absolutely convinced you that this was one more project you were going to do.
Well, Matthew, truthfully, I don't think that alone would have done it. Every survivor story is extraordinary and important. There was something additional, I think, that I found in the life and personality of Siggy Wilzig that drew me to spending 7 years of my life writing his story. This was someone who in many ways embodied qualities that I would love to emulate in my own life. He had a wicked sense of humor. He had a joie de vivre that was absolutely stunning. This was a man who loved every moment of his life and was joyful. I mean, having gone through what he went through, and to be such a life lover. I wanted to understand more about this person. He was articulate, Shakespearean even, as one of the 100 people whom I interviewed for this book described him. Mesmerizing. As you saw that little clip from the Livingston Synagogue, he knew when to use his hands, when to lean forward to emphasize a point with an audience. He drew people in. One person said he would suck the air out of a room.
Now, I will play devil's advocate here. There's a lot of stories about Holocaust survivors who rags to riches. What makes this one different?
Well, there may be many rags to riches stories coming out of the survivor community. And again, it's not to say that any of them are less important, but no one did what Siggy did. No one entered America at age 21 and then proceeded to take over 2 publicly traded corporations in the most anti-Semitic industries in post-war America. Oil and gas was a highly waspish environment. There were no Jews in the oil industry in America. And as you heard Siggy describe himself in the film, commercial banks were also not run by Jews.
Correct.
He managed by sheer moxie and determination and energy to overcome formidable opponents. So I admired him the more I learned about him for being utterly fearless. If the book wasn't called Unstoppable, it would have been called Fearless. Nothing frightened him. If he walked into a business meeting and sensed a certain anti-Semitic vibe, let's say, in the room, he had a device. He would roll up his sleeve, point to his Auschwitz number, as he did in the film. And then he'd shake a finger and say, the last person to try to intimidate me was Hitler. He didn't succeed, and neither will you. And then he would put his jacket back on, walk out of the boardroom and beat them at their own game.
And speaking of intimidation, was there anything while you were writing this that you almost found insurmountable? Was there anything that was really intensely hard for you while you were writing this?
Well, yes, indeed. I mean, first of all, I have zero training in business. And thank goodness Ivan and his sister Sherry were there to help me along. Because try as I may, getting the details of stock trades and at what point something becomes, when does someone become the the controller of a corporation, right?
Correct.
So there was a steep learning curve there. A lot of people helped me with that, and I think in the end it turned out pretty accurate. But that was a bit of a challenge.
Were there any surprises while you were writing this story? Was there anything you learned or that his family didn't even know while you were writing this?
Well, some of the stories that he told about his tragic time in forced labor, and then in Auschwitz, and then the selections for death and the death marches and the torture and the starvation. While he did talk about those things earlier than the Shoah Foundation interview, many of the stories that he revealed there, he had not spoken of before. For example, he told the story of how he would invent characters in order to be able to get to stay alive in the camp. He would, whatever he heard the Nazis needed, he became that. He heard they needed bricklayers. He walked up and took off his cap and said, "I had years of training as a master bricklayer." He didn't know anything about bricklaying, but they put him to work, and he would learn by watching the other bricklayers, and then little by little he became what they needed. But he had pneumonia and had to get out of the cold, so he heard that they needed a doctor's assistant. Oh, I've had many years of assisting doctors in the hospital. So he got a job in the prisoner hospital. In the hospital, he found his father dying from a severe beating at the hands of the Gestapo. And as the assistant to the doctors in this hospital, he was given a vat of grated potatoes to serve out to all of the prisoners. Now, what he didn't know was that the guards were doing a triage. They were sending all of the very ill prisoners, those who were likely not going to survive. They were killing them and sending them off to have their bodies burned in the crematorium ovens. So they would make room for the other prisoners who could get better and be sent back to work. So Siggy's serving out the potatoes, including to his father. And in the testimony, he says, I think I helped kill my father. Those kinds of moments are tough, and he had not disclosed that until just weeks before he passed away. So there were some surprises. There were some things that were unexpected.
And did you get to work with him, or was it based on testimony and diaries and friends and family?
Yeah, no, sadly, I never got to meet him in person. I feel like I know him after 8 years and talking with about 100 people interviewed for the book. And they all had the most amazing Siggy stories. Everybody had a Siggy story to tell. He was a man with a heart of gold. If he could do something for somebody, he did. There was one man who told me a story that he was in one of Siggy's bank branches. The bank was called Trust Company of New Jersey. And it was around Christmas time. And by this point, Siggy had become the president of the bank and the chairman of the board and the CEO. And yet he would still visit all of the branches personally, all the time, circulating around the branches of the bank. He walked in, there was a woman crying there, and he walked over and asked the manager who was talking with her what seems to be the problem. And the manager says, well, she joined our Christmas club, but she joined too late to get the full amount that she had hoped for. And now she's very sad because she won't have enough money to buy all the Christmas presents for her family she wanted to. And Siggy says, Madam, I'm the bank president. Here's my card. Let me see your deposit book. And he looks at it. You know, we've made a mistake. Actually, all the money is there. Don't worry. You will get the full amount of your Christmas club deposits. And he's signaling to the manager, give her the money, give her the money. They would do things like that. If he could make someone feel good, if he could help someone in need, that was his great joy.
It's kind of amazing, and this is a perfect fit for our organization, only because our building was designed by Stanley Tigerman. And as you enter the building, he says you enter through darkness, but you exit through light. And the only way to exit through light is to go through the full exhibition, which I feel kind of ties exactly to what Siggy said. Like, you had to experience the dark before you could get to that light. And anyway, I think Stanley Tigerman would be very impressed with that as well. What would Siggy want us to take away from this book? If he were here with us tonight, I mean, he'd probably be talking.
Yeah, I wait for that question. That's a good question. He would first want us to know, never let the bullies get the upper hand. Bullies are cowards pretending otherwise. And don't keep your eyes focused on the ground. Look up. There's always a glimmer of hope. There's always something that will help you. Let me tell you a quick story, if I may.
Please.
You know, in Auschwitz, one of the big questions was, is there a God? You know, the prisoners seeing all of the torture and suffering, pain and death around them would debate this question. Maybe there was a God, but he's abandoned us now and it doesn't care anymore. But Siggy, who was a very devout Jew, never lost his faith. After liberation, he volunteered to work for the US Counterintelligence Corps, which was the branch of the army that went looking for Nazis who had fled from the camps after.
Oh, the bad guy hunters.
Yes, like Simon Wiesenthal was part of that counterintelligence corps. And his job took him on his first plane ride. And it was a very cloudy, rainy day. And Siggy describes that the plane took off and burst through the cloud bank. And on the other side of the clouds, the sun was shining. It was a bright, beautiful blue sky on the other side of the clouds. And he said, in that moment, my faith in the Almighty was confirmed. He said, sometimes God was talking to me and saying that sometimes a cloud like Hitler may get between us, but don't despair, I'm always here. I think he would want us to know that. He was someone who believed that life tends toward the light, no matter how dark it gets. One time he said, God may have created snakes and spiders, but he also created flowers and butterflies. So he was able to see those two sides of life.
We illustrate throughout our exhibit, and you mentioned that you have visited, so thank you. We pride ourselves on telling the story of the Holocaust through individual stories. Collectively, when people leave, they realize that this didn't happen to one person, this happened to hundreds, thousands, millions of people, and each one of them had a story. And we were lucky enough to be able to share with them the stories that we have in the museum. Would I be able to convince you to maybe read us an excerpt from your book?
Sure. I think a short but meaningful section is in the first chapter. This is when Siggy arrives in New York at age 21. He has no money, no contacts. It's the coldest record in winter on record in 50 years in New York. Big blizzard. And the highest Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society has found a room for him in a hotel in Harlem called Hotel Marseille. So this excerpt is when Siggy has finally settled into his room in the Hotel Marseille. He looked out from the window down on pedestrians heading home through blinding snow. Amazement over being in America was quickly giving way to harsh realities. What now, he wondered? He had nothing, no resources, no credentials. He spoke with a thick German accent, stood only 5.5 inches short, and years of torture and starvation were fresh in his mind. Yet here he was, still breathing, staring out the window at snow-covered New York streets. By comparison with the past, everything here was a paradise. The bus ride to Harlem from Ellis Island had been paradise. The neighborhood grocery stores, high-rise buildings, and beer trucks below his window were paradise. His smelly room in an overcrowded hotel with cockroaches scurrying across the scuffed hardwood floor, the heavy snowfall outside his window, the $200 remaining in his pocket, which would soon disappear if he didn't find work. It was all paradise. On the street below his window, weary pedestrians fought driving winds and 6-foot-high snowdrifts, evoking for Siggy harsh memories of other blinding storms when starving men and women trudged forward on death marches, wearing nothing more than thin prisoner uniforms. Traffic in the New York streets snarled and drivers honked their horns, impatient to get to wherever they were going. Even to a 21-year-old newcomer like Siggy, it was clear that Americans who never knew the inside of a concentration camp were alive in every sense, moving purposely forward towards some vision of tomorrow. He liked that, and he would do that too, grasp opportunities and not allow the darkness of the past to rob him of a bright future. And in that seminal moment of his new life, Siggy made 3 promises to himself. First, he would never go hungry again. Second, he would marry a Jewish woman, have children, and help rebuild the Jewish people. Third, he would preserve Holocaust memory and speak up whenever he witnessed injustice. He had no illusions about these vows. He knew better than to think he could change the world. Anti-Semitism would never go away. and Jews would always be persecuted. That was just business as usual. Still, the Almighty had saved him. And now his job was to grab whatever scraps remained from the rubble of his life and cobble them back together into an edifice of yet to be determined size and shape.
Thank you so much for that. I am impressed because one of the phenomenal things that literature and memoirs can do for us is provide a window into that time and the mindset of what made somebody so brave and how they survived. And I think that it's perfect to be used for remembrance or commemoration. How do you think Siggy would feel about his story being used to inspire people about the history that transpired?
Oh, I think he'd be absolutely thrilled. We know that he always wanted to tell his story and that he was initially concerned about turning it over to the Shoah Foundation. He didn't want it just sitting on a shelf until somebody stumbled upon it. So I think, first of all, he'd be absolutely delighted to know that his book has made it to a few bestseller lists and is being published in 7 languages, and there might even be a television adaptation coming up. So all of that, I think, would thrill him. I think the most important thing for him would be that his life is a vehicle for educating people about the Holocaust. That was the main thing for him, Holocaust education. That would have been his message. Teach the Holocaust, never stop teaching the Holocaust. As soon as we stop teaching the Holocaust, as soon as we allow the Holocaust to fade into history like some faraway event, the French Revolution or ancient Greece or Rome, the door opens to unimaginable repeat of the darkness. And so for Siggy, I think the meaning of his life was that it became a vehicle for allowing people to understand what happened, why it happened, and to be vigilant that it should never happen again.
I'm speechless. That's amazing. I wish that right now that he could just log in and give us his sense about it as well. I feel like he almost could be. He's probably smiling wherever he is right now. What's next for you? What will you be working on next, or what are you working on?
Well, I mean, I was privileged to be awarded the 2022 fellowship by the Yale University Holocaust Video Archive. And along with that honor came an assignment, namely to do a documentary on the life and career of Holocaust scholar Professor Lawrence Langer, who is truly one of the outstanding voices in the field of Holocaust witness testimony. And so that's coming along well. And we'll see after that.
Do you think that Siggy would have an opinion about the state of affairs today? And I mean, for instance, in Illinois, we have a mandate to teach Holocaust education. That's not true in every state in the country. What do you feel his opinions would be on education, and when should it start on this subject?
Yeah, that's a complex issue, and I don't want to presume to know all of Siggy's thoughts. He would have been cautious about exposing children at too young an age to issues or images of atrocity. When his son Ivan was a young boy, perhaps 6 years old or so, and saw the number on his father's arm, he asked him what that is. And Siggy said, "Oh, that's my telephone number. I have a terrible memory, so I had it written down there." He didn't want his children or other children at such a young age to live with such nightmares. He lived with those nightmares all the time. He knew what it was like to live with those nightmares. So that he would not have wanted. But certainly starting in junior high school and high school, there is a way to introduce Holocaust studies. There are extraordinary organizations like Facing History and Ourselves, based in Massachusetts, that do an amazing job of training teachers how to teach the Holocaust. We're currently working with the state of Florida on a lesson plan which will bring Siggy Wilzig's story into classrooms across the state of Florida. And after that, there are discussions underway with other states as well. The point being that there's nothing like the personal narrative for bringing to life history, no matter how complex or tragic it may have been. And Siggy, by dint of what he was able to do, I think this is critically important. Not all survivors came out of the Holocaust with that same ability to rebound and make their mark on the level that Siggy Wilson did. And his accomplishments serve as a reminder and inspiration, if you will, for young people in particular, not to dwell on the darkness, but to see what humans are capable of having come through the darkest of times. There's something in psychology that's called post-traumatic growth. It's a somewhat controversial idea because sometimes people mistake it as an apology for atrocity and trauma, that there is this growth that can take place afterwards. That's not the intention. The intention is to say that there are clinical studies that show individuals having come through extreme trauma discover new reason to live, discover resources they did not know they had, discover new abilities and the capacity for translating the energies and experiences they derived into other arenas, as Siggy did in business, for example. And
someone has asked, why do you think it is that Deborah Lipstadt agreed to write the introduction?
Oh, that's a very good question. Deborah was very, very clear in her introduction that Unstoppable does something that other survivor memoirs don't always think to do, which is to emphasize the survivor's life after liberation. The trajectory of most survivor memoirs is this was what life was like prior to the Nazi rise to power. This is what happened to me when we were forced into ghettos. Then I was deported to the camps, death march, liberation, and now settled in Israel or America or wherever. There's only about the first 65 pages of this 320-page book that focus on Siggy Wilzig's dark years. The rest is what he did with that after coming to America. And I think Deborah was particularly impressed with that side of things. How was it possible for Siggy to love again? How was it possible for him to have a family again? How was it possible for him to experience joy again? We explore those subjects in the story.
Have you always, as a historian, author, been focused on or did your studies evolve in that direction?
They evolved in that direction. My background initially was in the philosophies of India, bhakti or devotional yoga, and the Sanskrit texts, Bhagavad Gita, and so on. Whenever I would be lecturing, this is many years ago, on this very spiritual vision of the world that's projected in the ancient Sanskrit texts, people would ask, well, how do you reconcile this very optimistic and beautiful vision of a purposeful creation with the horrors that took place 80 years ago in Europe? How do you put these these two things together in the same worldview? And honestly, Matthew, I didn't have a good answer. When the opportunity came along to get involved with helping the Yale Archive preserve their early years of video testimony and then make a documentary film for PBS from those early years, my understanding deepened. I'm not Solomon. I don't have all the wisdom of the ages, but I have a little bit better idea how to answer people now if they were to ask me that question. So there was this trajectory that began with a view of the universe from a very theistically bright tradition, this bhakti culture of India. And then moving into the Holocaust, it was my late father-in-law, Alan Fortunoff, who first got me involved in this. He was an avid supporter of the Yale Holocaust Video Archive and got me involved there.
Fantastic. Are you able to tell us, several people have actually asked, and I've received a few text messages, are you able to tell us any more about potentially the cinematography behind this, if this is going to become like a documentary, or would it be a drama?
Well, there's not a lot to report just now. There's a wonderful screenwriter who's done an adaptation of the book as a short series for one of the broadcast platforms. It would be indiscreet to try and hype that just now. And when it becomes real, it becomes real.
Well, I definitely think our audience is going to be keeping their eye out, because several people are very interested in that aspect.
Yeah, it's a very cinematic story. Siggy was a volcano of a personality. Right. And it's always fun to think about, well, who would play that part, you know? You can do that and have some fun with it.
As I said before, somebody with very good hair. There's
good hair and a very, very energetic voice.
Yes, absolutely. I would just like to say thank you on behalf of the museum. My colleague is going to drop a survey in to the chat and some links to our up and coming programming. I'd like to remind people that we have a program coming up next week, December 7th. We're going to be doing another book and author chat called X Troop by Leah Garrett. And I hope you can join us. And thank you again so much for this evening, Joshua. This has been an absolute pleasure. And I thank you for taking time out of your schedule to spend the evening with us.
It's my pleasure as well. You're very welcome.
And to our audience, thank you and have a good night. And if you celebrate, happy 5th night. Good night.